Hello, everyone. Dean Jessica Stern here, and I'm being joined by Dr. Robert McLean from the Department of History. And he's here to help us make a lot of things world order make sense. So we're going to be talking about the decisions that nations make when joining world conflicts. We're going to be talking about NATO. We're going to be talking about what America's world stage presence is right now. So thank you so much for being here and helping us make it make sense.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to start kind of broad, right? So I'm an American historian, right? So one of the early stories we tell about George Washington is he makes this decision very early on not to enter the French Revolution, the statement of neutrality. And then we see throughout American history times when America is very insulationist and times where they want to have a world presence. So I was hoping you could walk us through what are some of the decisions that nations make what's some of the decision-making process that nations go through when deciding whether to be isolationist or expansionist?
Well, speaking in the broadest sense, nations tend to go to war when they perceive that some strategic interest is threatened or that there is a threat to their well-being. Now, it's always been my observation that regardless of the form of government that nation has, they will use a rhetoric that frames that intervention or joining that conflict or a conflict in a way to make it acceptable. And so I'm sure we'll touch upon Russia at some point. And if you want to think about the conflicts that are going on globally now, Russia of 2026 looks a little bit like Russia of the 18th century. You know, they pursue a policy like expanding into Crimea, expanding into Central Asia, Russification, which they pursued immediately when they invaded Ukraine in 2022. And then in terms more specifically of the United States, if you just kind of work your way through, I think Washington, one of his reasoning was probably we really need to consolidate ourselves.
Right.
And not become involved in the French Revolution. Even though France was instrumental in helping secure American independence. And at that time too, you know, our governing structure was a lot looser. We weren't as centralized, and it was a very young country. Just the concept of being American was fairly new in terms of creating a concept of the nation and who belongs to the nation. And then if you work your way through American history, you know, I'm not an Americanist historian, but I do know a bit, you know, just as a generalist. The Mexican-American War barely got through Congress. I believe it was one vote. If that's an error of fact, I apologize, but I do know that it was close. The American Civil War, I'm not sure how to address that one, but when you get to the Spanish-American War, that's to a significant extent a manufacturing of consent to go to war with Spain. And it also is the height of imperialism where they can draw on different ideologies, social Darwinism, for example. And then in World War I, we have unrestricted submarine warfare on the part of Germany, even though the United States is selling large amounts of arms to the Allies. And the Zimmerman telegram, inviting Mexico to join the war and get the American Southwest back. And the outcome of that was, in the 1930s, a very strong isolationist sentiment, more so than even perhaps in the past. And I'm reflecting on George Washington's, you know, injunction to avoid foreign entanglements.
Yes.
You know, but the 1930s, there was a very strong isolationist sentiment, which I think the Roosevelt administration realized was not realistic. There's no way the United States is going to stay out of a global conflict just because of sheer mass. But the one thing that could have gotten Americans to willingly go to war was Pearl Harbor. And that changed things. And even with that, many Americans didn't necessarily want to fight Germany. They just wanted to annihilate Japan. And then the Korean War is fought under the aegis of a police action, which we can say more about that when we talk about the UN and NATO.
Mm-hmm.
And Vietnam was fought under the same guys, and so on and so forth. And then we get to September 11th, which is the only time Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty has been invoked. It's the only time is Article 5, which pledges mutual defense.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk in depth about NATO, but just in this context, say more about Article 5.
Okay, so Article 5 is the key, it's the heart of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the treaty that established it. And that pledges every member to come to the aid and defense of another member if they are attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people are familiar with Article 5, but before that there's Article 4, which is kind of comical in a way, well, we're going to invoke Article 4 before we invoke Article 5. Article 4 is where they open discussions about possibly intervening. And so this can also be tricky. What if you have members of NATO that they might go to war against each other? There have been near conflicts, between NATO members, like over fishing rights, for example. But in that case, Article 5 will be invoked against the member that is perceived to be the aggressor. But generally speaking, countries will go to war to protect, and this is a neutral statement, I believe, to protect what they perceive as their vital interest. Okay. And then they will find the rhetorical justification afterwards.
Okay. So to protect their vital interest.
And that vital interest now is energy.
But can we play with that a little bit? Because does the U.S. ever go to war because they see something they find against its values happening somewhere else? Or can it really be reduced? Maybe not. I guess what I'm thinking about, and maybe this is just less about war and more about global influence.
Right. Well,
I'm thinking about the Declaration of Independence, for instance. Like, I think that the Declaration of Independence sets up this momentum where Americans do become interested in other democracies that are also committed to their same values, right? So I think that there might also be, like, alliances might also be based on those kind of values and not just interests.
It is, and that's true. So I would say there's two statements that are true.
Yeah.
One is we do sometimes promote that. Secondly, we are also an imperial power. They're not mutually exclusive, right? So you may go to war in the Middle East because of a perceived threat to petroleum resources. Or Russia may invade Ukraine because of the energy in the eastern Ukraine and some other aspects, declining population, historical memory of Russian greatness and then Soviet greatness that's been eroded. But I was thinking about this morning, and as since we're colleagues, right, that I'm a historian of Britain.
Yes.
And the empire.
Yes.
And we are so similar in the sense that there were paradoxes to empire, in that the British Empire helped eliminate slavery. They, their navy patrolled the seas to eliminate, to stop slave trading.
Yeah.
Yet they built their industrial revolution economy to a significant extent on American slavery.
Yeah.
At the same time that they will later kind of put forth these values, of what they perceive as quintessentially British or English values of fair play and democracy. And so there's a paradox there.
Interesting.
In which a great power can and will do both. They can sometimes exhibit like a defense of democratic values or self-determination, as NATO did in Southeastern Europe in the 1990s, in the Bosnian War and the Kosovo War. establishing no-fly zones, for example, in the Middle East to protect civilians that are being threatened. That's under the umbrella of NATO, but that's really the United States.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You know, but sometimes that power is used as a blunt force for self-interest, and sometimes that power is used in a more idealistic way.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how I think that's how I would frame it. I'm not sure how good of an answer that is.
But I think it starts to explain a lot, right? If we even think about the discourse surrounding Venezuela, surrounding going into Iran, you know, surrounding Iraq, going back a couple decades, right? I think there's always both languages. There always like, we are going in to help the people, to bring democracy,
right?
And we want the oil, right?
And it happens to protect our, you know, global, right? You know, support global oil, you know, supplies, right?
Yeah.
So with Venezuela, that's an interesting case. That is pretty blatant, you know, because you remember under the previous Trump administration, they ran that up the flagpole in the previous administration, and his first Secretary of State, he was the chief officer in a major oil company, and they had invested heavily in Venezuela, and those assets were seized and essentially nationalized.
Right.
And so the other issue, if you want to talk and speak on Venezuela now, anybody that bought the "I'm going to be the no wars president" was deluded, because they have issued multiple statements that would mirror exactly something like Vladimir Putin would say. We're a great power. This is Stephen Miller.
Yep.
Basically, to paraphrase him, we're a great power, and we're going to use that power, and we're going to behave like that. And this foreshadows a question that we were going to talk about later.
Right.
You know,
Let's go.
American shift.
Yeah.
That you know, we are abandoning international norms of behavior. Flat out. Aggression. Cuba is on the list, you know.
Yeah.
Supporting regimes that are anti-democratic, like Orban.
Yep.
And which that was a huge defeat, not just for Orban and his party, but it was a rebuke of the current administration and a rebuke of Russia. And so supporting those regimes internationally, removing support for Ukraine, drawing very close to Russia and Vladimir Putin. There was at least some kind of moral aspect, even though American power was sometimes exercised very bluntly and was frankly imperialistically.
Right.
That's been abandoned. You know, the rhetoric, they're not even trying to pretend that they're following the rhetoric of that.
Right.
They're not cloaking anything. It's just naked power.
Yeah. Okay. So because I think this kind of goes back to when I brought up the Declaration of Independence, right? Like, are you saying the change feels like we used to choose our allies based on who we felt encapsulate our values, and now we're choosing our allies based on, let's fill that out,
based on pure power, and ego, and who will benefit me.
Okay.
So it's about power, it's about ego, it's about an anti. How do I say this? Some sort of antagonism to a broad-based democracy.
What would usually be? I mean, I'm sure we've had like tons of power-hungry presidents in the past.
Gosh,
I probably kind of comes
they just
with
do
the
a
job,
good job.
right?
They do a good job of, you know.
Yeah. What are the common checks against using alliance and warfare for these to accrue power? Is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing a president not hewing to it, an administration not hewing to it, or are we seeing a decay of checks and balances?
I think both.
Yeah, let's
There's
play
both,
that out.
But the War Powers Act for the Congress that was created after the Vietnam War, which was supposed to give Congress the power to authorize going to war, virtually everyone has ignored that.
Yeah.
But they've reached a new level here in that, prior to the Venezuela excursion or Iran excursion, there was no consultation.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they'll at least consult with congressional leaders before they make that kind of move, right? And so there is a chaos to it, a lack of forethought. Who could imagine? I know that you had a previous low-key talk on the Straits of Hormuz. Who could imagine that a strait only 2 navigable miles wide could be closed? What a shocker!
Yeah.
There was, and that a country of 93 million with a strong security apparatus is different than Venezuela.
Yeah.
There's a chaoticness here.
Yeah.
Now, I want to follow up on this. Based on the elections that just happened in Europe and some of the elections that are happening elsewhere and the momentum, I think there's going to be a pushback. And I think there are a lot of political leaders in the United States, within Congress, within the GOP, who want this to end.
This being, let's clarify what
this chaos
is.
This
okay,
chaos.
like the whole, like broadly, like
but they're afraid to say it.
Yeah.
And the support, they want to support Ukraine.
Yeah.
They perceive Russia as a real threat because they are. They're what we would refer to in this new world as a hybrid threat, right? Because they're actively using social media, which can cross borders instantly to undermine other countries.
Right.
They intervened in the American elections. They intervened in the Brexit vote. They've intervened in French elections, Hungarian elections, German elections, Italian elections. They're intervening in all of them because they know they cannot outspend anybody. But they can use cyber tactics and social media and bots to influence behavior and to sow division within those countries. I mean, both these elections, the last three elections were pretty close. And then the Brexit vote was extremely close.
Yeah.
And so, but the defeat of Orban is a real slap. This is a man who's been invited to CPAC on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
And so that was a real slap to Russian intervention.
Yeah, for folks who don't really know much about Orban, can you just say a little bit about what is Orban's platform? Why is he appealing to certain politicians, and more about why you see his defeat as a slap?
Because they've been so effective in the United States and, again, Italy, Hungary, at drawing on populist resentment.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's very easy to manufacture resentment rhetorically. Again, especially the internet is a war front. It's essentially a rhetorical war front. I go back to Benedict Anderson's argument about the anthropologists who argued that the modern newspaper enabled nationalism because people can share the same ideas and create a common identity. Well, the internet is that on steroids. And these populists use the same playbook. It's the resentment playbook.
Yeah.
And a lot of it turns on immigration wherever you are.
Yeah.
The United States, Britain, France, Italy, Hungary. It's immigration. Particularly with after the Syrian war, when people started coming across the Mediterranean. And I mean, the original sin in all this is, the destabilization of Iraq in the early 2000s. That it just kind of, what was envisioned as this, kind of wave of democracy coming through the
Yep.
Middle East that would create a line of states going from Turkey through Iraq down into, what was then Mubarak's Egypt as this bulwark.
Yeah.
A manifestation of the Arabs, an Arab Spring type of situation, totally backfired.
Yep.
It completely backfired, right? And so it wasn't just Iraqi refugees. There's, Syria, Iraq, Iran's, intervention in those regions too.
Yeah.
Iran was the big winner of all of that. The great Shia power. They were the big winner of this.
Yeah.
The United States made Iran the big winner by removing their main enemy.
So I think this will be really interesting.
I'm sorry, I'm all over the place.
No, I'm going to let me focus us in one place though, because I think this will be like an interesting global context for our viewers. This point that you're making about immigration being a language of grievance for say that's so interesting. What would make that so impactful? What are you seeing there? What sense do we make of that?
That's, to me, that's the common denominator of these populist movements. It's been enabled in the United States because it's been a long-term, issue. That use of the internet to popularize replacement theory.
Which is for our audience that doesn't know.
Replacement theory is the idea that more progressive Americans, and especially politicians, are just bringing in as many illegal immigrants as they can to replace whites.
Yes.
And to fundamentally to gain political power. Now, which is a ridiculous idea because it's not like this is a new issue. In the 1920s, we had a huge migrant population that did most of the agricultural work. Well, then they deported them in the late 20s and early 30s because of the Depression. And then they brought them back in World War II because they couldn't harvest. Well, the same thing has happened in Europe with the displacements because of the wars in the Middle East. Again, which I think the original sin in all of this was Iraq. Note that the first Bush president made sure that Hussein stayed in power because he was afraid of the power vacuum that would happen. And the second one removed him, which was a huge mistake. As bad of a guy as he was. But the result of that is these migrations into Europe have made it easy, particularly when in those migrant groups, Libyan, Syrian, what have you, that you will have sometimes radical elements, that will essentially victimize these people twice. They're victimized in their homeland and they're forced out. And then if you have 10,000 people going into Germany and 5 of them commit attacks, everybody becomes guilty. And they're victimized again. But that is the common denominator, along with the erosion of, a secure economic life. And so those things make this, that leads to the creation of these populist and anti-democratic movements. And to connect all of this together, that are antagonistic to internationalism, that are antagonistic to concepts of free trade, like the European Union, like
there's
collective security.
They go together. Like, what is the connection?
They do.
Okay.
That, and also appealing to the nation, appealing to that concept. To use one example, the nationalist movement, the ultra-nationalist movement in Greece. They rely on a version of history, as many of these movements do, that isn't really accurate. When we were one great, ancient Greece was the greatest. When we were one Greece, it's like, well, you were killing the hell out of each other. You were slaughtering each, between city-states.
Right.
But they use a symbol that looks suspiciously like a swastika. And they have, there's an appeal to this kind of millennial I'm sorry, millenarian nationalism.
Yeah.
The idea that we were once a great country when we were, united Italy or ancient Italy or ancient France. Our hearts are there, or ancient Russia.
Yeah.
These Ukrainians, all they are, they're just ancient Rus. The original kind of tribal roots of Russia. They're Rus. They just don't remember it.
Yeah.
And so if you can, to draw all of this together, you have an idea that the post-war or the post-World War II order, it's outlived its usefulness. We're being inundated by outsiders. It's eroding.
This is a story that the populists
it's
okay.
The same playbook over and over.
Yeah.
Right? Our identity is being eroded.
Yep.
Who we are is being eroded. So therefore, and we're suffering for it. If I'm suffering economically, it's somebody else. It's the other's fault with a capital O. It's the other that is causing this to happen to me, and we need to get rid of them. Yeah.
So in this context, the U.S. is a latecomer.
Yeah, we actually are. Yeah, we actually.
Which may mean, but you said...
Orban's been in power for 15 years.
Yeah,
he was in power for 14 years.
Yeah, we're a little Johnny-come-lately here.
And Little England, that was, going back... I'm sorry.
Let me just share this real quick,
because as a British historian, going back to the 1970s and 80s, soccer hooligans would organize around, like, these immigrants. When we're not beating up members of another firm or another team's followers, we've got to, we're going to wrap ourselves in the Union Jack, and we're going to go after anybody that's not like us.
Yeah. But these governments are collapsing in Europe, you said, right? Somewhat. Okay.
Somewhat.
Do we know yet why? Do we have enough historical perspective to know why?
It always comes down to economics and a growing activism. It also will animate those people who believe in the principles of of democracy. And like with Orban, their economy was, ordinary people are suffering.
Yeah.
It's not, they're not getting anywhere. With Russia, they're in a crisis. A lot of these countries are in demographic crises, particularly in Eastern Europe. Well, all over Europe, they're in demographic crises. Because modern economies, they tend to decrease birth rates. But then in the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, life expectancy has dropped. And they're in crisis.
So it's not paying off. Like this dream that this type of government would make their lives better, it's just not paying off. And people are saying
in most places.
Yeah.
That, and those governments can also monopolize media.
Yeah.
And that's hard to beat that.
Yeah, it's hard to break through there.
Yeah.
Let's now start focusing on NATO.
Okay.
Because I think this is NATO is in the news, and it may be a gap that people don't know much about. So let's just start with the basics. Okay. What is NATO?
Okay. NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization that was established in the late 40s after World War II.
Okay.
And so we can't really talk about NATO without mentioning the United Nations, which also came out of World War II. It was supposed to be a forum for countries to settle their differences in a less belligerent way. NATO is more or less a manifestation of the United Nations as it existed then. This is a separate question. I really don't want to get into the United Nations. A lot of people would say it's outlived its usefulness. But the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in the late 1940s in response to the perception that the Soviet Union would be a threat to Western Europe. And so its mission, essentially from, say, I can't remember if it was 47 or 49, as it initially formed and coalesced and added members, was to answer a threat from the Soviet Union, and then the Warsaw Pact, which was formed in 1955. It's the Soviet Union plus the Eastern states.
Okay.
in the Soviet orbit. And so until the early 1990s, that was their mission. Okay, that was their mission. But with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, they began to move more towards kind of more, I guess, peacekeeping and these kind of auxiliary operations. Maybe there's a disaster somewhere and they'll send NATO troops. But then, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, their mission kind of changed. And although, there was active intervention in the war in former Yugoslavia in the early 1990s, active intervention in Kosovo. Of course, they did intervene in, also in a couple of other areas. I'm blanking out on that right now. But the United States was really the main guarantor of NATO. Financially, militarily, we're just too much. Our mass, we had the financial ability, we had the military capability to really be the foundation of NATO.
Yeah.
Now, that's coming, and I'm sure we'll discuss this in a little bit. That's coming into question now, but it was effective. The members tended to be trained to common standards.
Okay.
But it was, and each member was, one of the sticking points for the United States was always the idea that we pay way more as a percentage of our GDP.
Right.
Which was true.
Yeah.
That said, all the European states, except for maybe Spain now, are meeting that obligation.
Okay, but before we get to some of the criticisms, let's just stay a little bit longer in NATO. So, the major actions it takes. So it becomes kind of this peacemaking. Its goal is peace, right?
It was deterrence against the Soviets.
And then in the
90s, it began to shift towards what is our mission?
Yeah.
What is our mission?
Yeah.
And also, I think it's important to point out you have to see it as operating in parallel with the European Union.
How so?
Well, it's kind of like the European Union is like the economic wing, and NATO is the military force of this common market, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
And so yes, their mission kind of changed, but that mission is shifting back to what it originally was.
Deterrence
against Russia.
Okay, so that's where we are. So when did that change? How solid is that change?
2022.
Okay.
Well, initially there was some, the alarm bell started to go off in 2014 with Russia's annexation of Crimea.
Yeah.
In 2022, it's a full-on, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We better get it together. And then with the outright belligerence of the current administration to NATO, it's become even more imperative. And so you see, for example, who would imagine that Germany and Poland, given their history in World War II, when Germany invaded Poland, and Poland lost more lives as a percentage of their population than any country, because of the massacre of Poles by the Soviets and the Germans, or the Nazis, and the Holocaust. That Poland and Germany would begin really working closely together, and that Germany will have, I can't recall if they do already, but German troops will be on Polish soil in eastern Poland.
Yeah.
Because Germany is rapidly increasing their defense spending very quickly, and growing their army because they are deeply concerned about Russia.
And this is all through NATO. So
it's right, and it's kind of a Europeanization of NATO.
Okay.
With various agreements, with different agreements, and we'll see what happens in the Hungarian case, because the new leader there has pledged closer cooperation with the EU. Although in his statements, he seems to be walking a fine line about maybe he's definitely orienting towards the West, but he's also trying not to fully upset Russia.
Because who is part of NATO? Let's kind of
basically all of Western Europe.
Okay, all of Western Europe is part of NATO.
And the Baltic states, they're the countries that joined after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine is not, of course, right? That's a major sticking point. Poland, most of Western Europe and part of Eastern Europe. And most recently, because of the war, the Russo-Ukrainian war, Sweden and Finland.
Okay.
Because Sweden and Finland had traditionally maintained a kind of a neutrality, but for them to abandon this neutrality is remarkable. It's and it adds hundreds of miles of border. Finland joining NATO adds hundreds of miles of border that Russia has to account for. So it's very significant. What can they do without the American membership? That's a good question.
Okay, so since Trump's first administration, or even before, let's chart how America's investment in NATO has changed over time and where we are now.
Okay, I think I have not seen recent figures, but every president has complained that we were paying too much.
Okay.
Now, granted, I think that was a little bit of a hollow complaint because American bases in Europe allowed them to project power, imperial power in some cases. Wounded soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan were often flown into Germany.
And that was because of our membership in NATO.
Because our bases in Germany. You're like at Ramstein,
Yeah, and we're allowed to have those bases because we're part of NATO?
That's
partially?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, American projection of power is dependent on their ability to be in those countries.
Right.
And so, the complaints about the money from the current administration, that's not true.
It's not.
It's an excuse.
To what? So what?
It's an excuse to draw closer to Putin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one theory.
I know this is controversial. You might, if you want to edit this out.
Well, look, maybe to make it less controversial. So let's kind of run through what are the different reasons or different theories that folks might have of why the U.S. is backing out of NATO. What might some people say?
Okay. Well, what's publicly said is that they haven't been paying their fair share.
Okay. And are we are we backing out completely, or we're just we're going to recalibrate?
There is a clear desire by the current administration, I think, to withdraw. But I really think they realize they don't have the political capital, because even within their own party, there would be significant opposition to that. And I can't get around the anti-democratic tendencies of the administration.
Okay, let's throw that out.
There's no other reason. There's no other reason. If I had to guess, it's just because of ego and a lack of historical awareness and a lack of commitment to the post-war values of World War II.
Say more about what those
values. Well, you can look at, for example, there's a meeting in 1941, in August of 1941, before the United States enters the war. Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill meet in Canada at Placentia Bay. And they develop a concept. It's not a formal agreement, called the Atlantic Charter, where after our second war in 31 years, or 30 or so years, right? And the failure of the League of Nations, which was, it failed. Going back to your point earlier about American isolationism, it failed in the American Senate. The United States did not join that, because of Henry Cabot Lodge.
And this is just for the League of Nations was an earlier alliance system.
An early attempt at a collective security agreement after World War I that failed. The Russia was not in it because they were going through their civil war, and then the creation of the Soviet Union. And the United States was, the impression in the United States was, why did we just get involved in that war?
Yeah.
And then Germany withdrew in 1933, as did Japan. So it's a dead letter. So the Atlantic Charter is kind of laying the groundwork for a collective security body and what would become the United Nations that would be based on self-determination, free trade, peaceful settling of disputes, and I think that's kind of the freedom of navigation of the seas, which is in the news now, and those were kind of there were a couple of other aspects of it that escape me right now, but that was mainly it. And the other aspect of that, it was just like, we're going to establish the framework for this before this war is over. We're not going to wait until after the war. And when the war is over, I forgot one aspect of that was, we're going to make sure that the defeated powers, meaning clearly it's going to be Germany and probably Japan, the defeated powers, we are going to root out the leadership that, in the case of Germany, has brought war twice. And resulting in, they don't know it yet, but millions of people are going to die. And in the case of Japan, the war in China had been going on since 1937. So we're going to root that leadership out. And we are not going to punitively treat those defeated nations in the sense that they will be fully integrated into the global economy. Because if you have this punitive peace again, what did that get us this time? And so the Atlantic Charter lays the foundation for that.
It's kind of brilliant. I mean, one of the reasons I'm a historian, one of the questions I often toil with is, what are the conditions one needs for meaningful change? And the story of like Germany after World War II and almost like a abrupt cultural change is really significant. And I think maybe the roadmap you lay out, I mean, maybe to ask that as a question, was it effective? I think so, but I think so because Japan and Germany both became economic powerhouses that were democratic. And the only way to do it was to utterly root them out. Now, a lot of them worked their way back in, to power. They'd been, quote, denazified or, what have you. Or in the case of Japan, the emperor is kind of rehabilitated, but they executed enough of the militarists and the war criminals. A lot of them slipped through the cracks or were cleansed because they were useful to the Allied powers, in some way. But the only way to do that was to utterly, as they suggested at the Atlantic meeting in Placentia Bay, was to utterly root them out. And so those became the guiding principles of the post-war order, to tie this back together, that are now under duress. And this is serious stuff. What post-World War II values are under threat?
First of all, I would say a commitment to human rights. That is definitely under duress. And again, because of resentment that can be manufactured by populist movements. Secondly, a commitment to the post-war values of democracy are under threat, in that in Europe and in the United States, democratic institutions are under attack, particularly in structural changes with regard to elections and false claims with regard to elections. And so I would say human rights and the democratic process as established in the post-war order are under attack.
And it seems like some of these things NATO was designed to protect. Can NATO do anything in this arena now?
I think rather than thinking of it, I think I would consider it more in terms of the European Union.
Okay.
Because to have membership in the European Union, you have to follow guidelines for free and fair elections. Now, granted, you can't separate the EU really from NATO. They tend to orbit in the same elliptical path. But membership in the EU is predicated on protection of human rights, free economic zones, which are, can be problematic in some ways, and free and fair elections. And so it's kind of an EU question.
Yeah.
But where that fails, you will sometimes see NATO intervene. And so, for example, with the collapse of Yugoslavia and some of the massacres that were occurring in the Bosnian War, NATO did intervene. But there was also huge failures there with the massacre at Srebrenica, where UN peacekeeping troops were told you're going to be annihilated if you don't hand over these civilians, and then those civilians were murdered by Serbian paramilitaries. Yeah. Granted, there were it was just mutual atrocity across the board, it's very difficult to separate those things. But when those countries post-war, after the settlement of those post-war settlements, to join the EU and to join NATO, they had to guarantee fair elections and respect for human rights to qualify for membership in those organizations.
What is the stick? What is the penalty? Just being excised from those organizations?
Economic.
Okay.
Economic penalties, right? I mean, if if you can export your agricultural products into Western Europe, you can do pretty good. If people in those countries can kind of see, wow, their standard of living looks a lot better, like a lot of Ukrainians did, particularly in Western Ukraine, that began more Western facing. It's like, gosh, it doesn't look like Russians are really living great. And we have a very corrupt government, Maybe if we orient towards the West, we can have a better life, And again, these are very simplistic ways to say this, but I'm simplifying some very complex and sometimes ambiguous things.
I mean, this may be a good time then to ask, like, what else do you teach, right? Like for viewers who do want to learn more from you, or even from the history department or another, like what courses do you recommend?
Well, for foreign policy issues, I would say Kate Burlingham, our colleague Kate Burlingham is, she's our foreign policy expert. I have a field in foreign policy, but I'm trained as a British historian, of the historian of the British Empire that studies, concepts of race and gender within the British Empire, particularly gender and masculinity, and how concepts of masculinity undergirded imperial power. But I also teach World War II, which would be an excellent complement to Dr. Burlingham's courses. I teach modern British Empire, which It mirrors American empire in a number of ways. And so I think that kind of palette of courses would be the best option. But I do have a very good foreign policy background. I had a field in foreign policy as an MA student, and I studied with a man I was very scared of, Paul Schrader at the University of Illinois, who was um, possibly the most notable foreign policy scholar at that time in the United States.
Let's push your history a little bit back. Like, how did you become a historian?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I was always surrounded by books, and my grandfather had a great sense of history. He was the son of Italian immigrants that went to school in Rome and took refuge in the Vatican as a medical student. He dressed as a monk and took refuge in Vatican City.
Wow.
And then when Rome was liberated, he joined the American Army and served as a medical officer. But I would be in his library. And then growing up in the South, they had this very strong sense of history as Southerners because of their whole lost cause mythology. Yep. I was raised with that. And so history was everywhere around me, and I was just captivated by it. And so even though I went on to get a business degree, my first love was history, and I came back for it.
Oh, you did you actually graduate with a business degree first?
I did. I worked for a bank.
I don't know that part of your story.
And I sold advertising. Yeah, that's what I say. And so, yeah, that's part of the story. And but I always loved history. A 10th grade teacher entered me in a history competition for the district without telling me, and then commanded me to go do the competition. And he was also my high school football coach and threatened me with running sprints nonstop. And so I went and I won the district competition.
Wow. And
so I really believe in the power of history. I believe it's kind of coming, we need to retrench on that, reinvest in it. And it's the best analytical tool available for understanding complex problems at a time where everything is presented in an either or dichotomous fashion.
Yeah.
We've already had all of these debates that we're currently debating in politics and culture. They've all been done before.
Yep.
So my stepfather used to dress as effing Robert E. Lee and ride a horse in the town parade. And so that was part of the school curriculum, and probably until the 60s. But what really, when I was one of the few kids that went to black schools, because, when I was a first grader, which was, I hate to date myself, but that was 1971. I was in first grade, and they were just really getting going on integration. My third grade teacher my social studies teacher was very influential in my reading, Mr. Terry, an African-American man. And I tracked him down about 5 years ago. And he always called me McLean, even in third grade. And he was like, well, you were part of an experiment. We were all part of an experiment. And I was like, what? And so, yeah. And then
were there other, so paint the picture of your third grade class. I
was one of the only white kids.
Okay, so.
Oh, well, I take that back. And that school was pretty well mixed.
Okay.
But by the time I got to junior high, I can remember, like in my history course, I was the only white kid. I was the only one, except for this guy, Frank, who got arrested for something because we were all white trash. He stole a car. So I'll tell you something else. I remember my aunt and uncle taking me to see Sesame Street, the show, at Jackson Coliseum. And they had to reschedule it because the state prevented it from being performed the first time because they had black and white people on the stage together.
Wow, so the state had the power to do
It
that?
was the state, or it was I can't remember who did it, but I was reading a book called Street Gang about Sesame Street, the history of Sesame Street, and then I was like, holy, I went to that.
You went to that, yeah.
And so, my mother's classmate shot the civil rights workers in 1964. She remembers him as a very scary man, but the first time, it wasn't until my 20s that I had a professor at Belhaven College, and it was the first time I'd heard somebody say anything good about Abraham Lincoln.
Huh. Fascinating. But I mean, you go on to study gender.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so like from that early age, were you also picking up on gender dynamics, or where does that fit into
what? I was a very typical little homophobic asshole, redneck kid.
Yeah.
And I was raised, me and my 3 cousins were raised by twin mothers. And the one I was closest to came out.
When you were what age?
13.
Oh, okay.
12 or 13. And I started to think differently.
Yeah.
And then you get educated. But my cousin Jessica, our mothers were twin mothers. I had 2 moms. And my cousin was Jeff, but became Jessica.
Oh, okay.
And so we were close until she passed a few years ago. Very close,
Yeah.
I mean, we're my sister.
Yeah.
And so that'll change. That'll change you. And then going to Illinois, and it's like I tell my students, you have to have the intellectual integrity to challenge things you were raised with.
Yeah.
And hearing people say super racist things, but thinking my friends at school are black.
Yeah. Yeah.
My friends at school they're black. My friends are black.
Yeah, and the narratives you're hearing are not jiving with the reality you're living. Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense. How can somebody say that? Like, Carl's my friend. How can somebody say these things?
Yeah.
And just the malevolence. When you hear somebody say something with just malevolence, you're like, wow, this is evil. Because they're capable of doing something terrible. My mom's classmate, and then, because my mom was a single mom, she had just enough money to have this woman watch me when I was young, Mary Tillman. And so I was raised partly by a black woman.
Yeah.
Who used to whip my ass. She did not play.
Yeah.
I saw her when I was 20. And she hadn't seen me since I was probably 8. And she opens the door, and I was like, Mary, it's Robbie. Because she's just looking at me like, Robbie.
Yeah.
And she just stares at me, gives me that glare. She's like, boy, you get your ass in here. You can't come see an old woman now and then.
Yeah.
Get your ass in here. Yeah. I was like, yes, ma'am. She was just still mad.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. McLean, for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Stern.
Make it make sense.